Okay. Hello.
Hi.
So this is Francesca from the Educators Room, and we are joining us for our series, The Teacher Who Travels. We have a guest here. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Oneika Raymond, and I have been teaching internationally now for about 9 years.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, so I have to be honest. I found her page about 6 months ago, and I have been looking at it and wishing I was her. And then about a week ago, she posted like a video of all her travels for the year and talked about her as an international teacher. So yes, Miss Oneika teaches. She's a teacher, and this is how she does it on a teaching salary. So I want to start. Can you give everybody a little bit of your background in education, what you taught, how many years, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. So I have been teaching for 10 years now. And basically, what happened was, teaching wasn't necessarily organic for me. When I was in university in my junior year of college, I went and I studied abroad in France, and I had an amazing time because I was an English and French literature major in school. So I grew up in Canada, so I took French, or was surrounded by French when I was growing up, and I really enjoyed it. And I decided to continue my studies in French when I got to university. So anyway, I saw that there was this opportunity to go abroad and study in France for the year, and I took that opportunity. And when I was there, I just had the best time. I had the most fantastic time. And as soon as it was time for me to go back to school, to move back home, I was kind of like, I need to go abroad again. It was my first kind of taste of travel, and I knew that this was something that I wanted to continue. So I went back and I completed my senior year of college, and I found out that there was this program, this teaching program that would allow me to go back to France for another year and be an English teaching assistant in a French public school. And it was run by the National Ministry of Education. And so I signed up and I was accepted, and then I moved back. That enabled me to move back to France for a second year. So I was in France, I was teaching English, ESL. It was great because I would run conversation classes. I would teach some very light, kind of grammar classes. And I just loved lifestyle. Every 6 weeks in France, there's some sort of holiday. So I traveled on all of my breaks, even though I was dirt poor because the program only paid a stipend. It wasn't a full salary or anything. And again, I saw teaching as a vehicle to go abroad and to live abroad. So I was maybe halfway through my year, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, like this needs to continue. Like I can't, I'm addicted. I want to live abroad. I want to stay abroad. How can I do this? And I remember that a friend of mine who was also a teaching assistant, he was dating this French girl. And this French girl was, a certified teacher, but she was teaching in a school just outside of London. So she was teaching at a school in England. And we chatted a little bit about her experiences. And she said to me, Oneika, this is fantastic. Teaching abroad in these sorts of schools, which are called international schools, has enabled me to live and work abroad. So essentially, I'm living somewhere, I'm getting a really good salary and great benefits, and I'm able to travel on all of my breaks. So as soon as she told me that, I inquired a little bit further, and then I realized that, what, I could make this work for myself. And therefore, I applied really quickly to get my teaching certification. So in Canada, it's a little bit different. You do a 4-year degree, and then you go back to school and you get another certification, I guess you could say. It's another degree. So at the time, I had already completed a 4-year bachelor's degree, and now I needed to get my bachelor in education, which would also give me kind of like state or provincial certification. So I went back and I did that. And I had my sights set on working internationally. And that just kind of got the ball rolling. A couple friends of mine that I had gone to high school with were actually already international school teachers. One girl was teaching at the American School of Bangkok. The other girl was teaching at the American School of Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. And they kind of advised me what to do. And by that time, by that time the following year, I was teaching in an international school in Monterrey, Mexico. And the ball just kind of kept on rolling from there. So I ended up getting a master's of education. So I have 3 degrees. I have a bachelor of education, I have a bachelor of arts, and I have a master's in education. And since Mexico, I have taught in international schools in London, in where was I? In London, and I've taught it in 2 different international schools in Hong Kong. So yeah, that's the very long-winded answer, but that provides, I guess, a little bit of background about my journey.
So I'm sitting back and I'm listening to this, and I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I literally grabbed my journal because, okay, so you get started teaching internationally. You've been to London, you've been to Mexico. I'm sorry, you've been to England, you've been to Mexico, you've been to Hong Kong. Okay, so let's go back. How do you even afford to travel? Because as educators in the States, we get very caught up in that we're not respected. We don't, we're burnt out. It's testing. And so when someone comes and says, I teach internationally and I'm traveling, and I'm like, and I literally, my face as you were talking was like, oh, what? It's just a whole different reality. So tell us, well, first, let's go back. What is it like teaching in an international school versus an American or a Canadian school?
So basically, international schools are typically set up in, the host country. So whether it's Hong Kong or Mexico or, the Netherlands or something like that. And they are schools that provide an education for foreign expatriate kids who just happen to be in that country. So for example, I taught at the Canadian International School of Hong Kong, and it was set up for kids, Canadian or otherwise, but usually foreign kids, expat kids, to come and get a Canadian, a Canadian or an American education. So for example, the local school system in Hong Kong, the classes are all given in Chinese, they are for Chinese kids. So for example, if my parents somehow got posted to Hong Kong for 2 years to go there to work, I obviously could not go to a local school in Hong Kong because the language of instruction is Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. I would completely sink in that sort of system. So what happens is that these institutions, these international schools, are set up for kids who are not typically from the host country, who would like an American or an international or Canadian or a British education. And what happens is when they eventually leave that school, they are able to apply for universities in their home country. A lot of the graduates from the schools that I've taught at go on to do their tertiary, their post-secondary education in the UK or in Australia or in America or in Canada. So that's basically what international schools are for. They provide usually English instruction, education or instruction that follows, a curriculum like a Canadian or American curriculum.
Oh, wow.
But that being said, a lot of international schools, what ends up happening is they have a lot of host nationals, rich host nationals attending that school as well. But the education is, the language of instruction in the schools that I've taught in at least are or is English.
Wow. Okay, so you're working in international schools, and on the weekends, I'm assuming that you're traveling. What is the salary? First off, what does a salary look like as an international? As a teaching assistant, we know that it's going to be very minimal. But when you're a fully certified teacher, what does a salary look like for you?
Oh, wow.
You can tell us your numbers,
yes.
But just like.
So I'm definitely happy to talk about that. So here's the big secret, and this is why a lot of international teachers, they go and they teach internationally and they stay international, because the salary I mean, obviously it depends on country and stuff like that, but the salary is incredible. So the benefit of working in these international schools is often your flights are paid for. You either get some sort of housing stipend, or they'll even provide accommodations for free. You get health care. Professional development is flowing because these schools, they're often very prestigious and they're very well funded. So whether they're privately funded or whether, some sort of governing body is giving money, these schools are very well funded. And the tuition, they're usually fee paying schools. So you have affluent families or companies that are paying for their employees to attend this school. So all of the schools that I've worked at basically have had like a one-to-one laptop program. So I've become very well versed in using technology in my teaching and in my instruction. I've had the opportunity to get certified in the International Baccalaureate program, which is kind of like an international sort of AP sort of thing. And it's been incredible. So when I taught in Mexico, so in Latin America, the salaries typically are not as good as in Asia. So we have the two opposite ends of the spectrum. So Latin America, the salaries aren't amazing. However, the cost of living is low. You usually don't have any expenses because your school basically paid for everything. And usually taxes and all of that are taken care of. So when I was living and teaching in Mexico, it was my first year of teaching. So, I was at the very bottom of the pay scale because the pay scales are usually stepped.
Right.
And, my salary wasn't high, but at the end of that 1 year, without saving or without trying, I came home with 10,000 USD cash in my hand. I was able to bring that back home. And the reason I was able to do that was because my housing was paid for. I had absolutely no bills. Electricity was paid for. They even paid for my food. So I was given I think it was at the time, this is back in 2007, I think it was like $150 a month or something like that for food, like in food vouchers. So I was, and Mexico was quite cheap. So I was able to even pocket some of that money. I had transportation to and from school provided. I had return flights provided. So I had absolutely no expenses at all. And this is, the real benefit of international schools, because I think the line of thinking is that if you're going to leave home, to teach in a foreign country, then these schools need to make it worth your while. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the schools in Asia pay fantastically well. So I'm sure many of your subscribers are aware that, they can go and teach English, they can go and teach ESL in Korea or in China or in Taiwan, and the pay is very good. The pay scale is quite high. Now, think about how much money you could be making if you were a certified teacher now. You with a teaching credential. So if any Joe Blow can go and teach English in Korea and, make a really good salary, if you are a certified teacher and professional with experience teaching in the US or in Canada or in the UK, you can make so much more. So yeah, that is really how I've been able to travel so much, basically because my salary has been quite high. And as years go on, or as the years pass, obviously I gain more experience and then I'm able to command a higher salary. So it's, financially, it's a great thing to do. So typically Latin American schools are more at the bottom end of the salary scale. European schools are kind of in the middle. They're the holy grail. A lot of people want to go and live and work in Europe and make their lives in Europe. And then schools in the Middle East and Asia are at the higher end of the scale. So, if you go and teach in Saudi Arabia, and a lot of the times it's a trade-off between, I guess, lifestyle and money.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
a lot of people, they love the lifestyle that they're able to have in Europe. Europe is, it's not a developing nation. It's, it's a first world region. So things tend to be more expensive, and the salaries are not as high. But in Asia, especially if you do some of these more kind of hardship posts, you get paid a lot more. But it may be, it's not for everybody, let's say. So a lot of people, are maybe not able to adjust to living in rural China. That's just the way it is. It's a little bit more difficult for people from the Western world to adapt. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider. One of the things that I always tell people is that it's not necessarily how much you make, it's more so how much you are able to save. So if you go and teach, you could teach in like Switzerland or something like that in Europe, where the salaries are very, very high. You will be making, as a certified teacher, 90,000 Swiss francs, which is probably like 100,000 USD or something like that. But life in Switzerland is very expensive. You could go to McDonald's and pay, 13 US dollars for a combo. Whereas if you teach in Mexico or in Panama or something, salaries are lower, but you can also have a meal for $5.
Wow.
That's something to think about. Yeah.
You brought up so much. I'm literally sitting here and I talk No, it's totally fine. I think the readers are going to really, really appreciate your frankness and your honesty, because a lot of teachers here in the States are fed up. They're over it. They're ready for something different. And they're making $30,000 a year with a master's and sometimes even a doctorate. They're making 50, and you're giving them this option of going overseas.
Yeah,
and saying,
where you could save $30,000 a year with $30,000 like in your pocket. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so I have a question. So you get there, you're teaching, you're traveling. How do you even, because I watch your blog. How do you even determine what countries that you're going to go to next? Because just take a second and tell everybody the countries you've just visited in 2015.
Oh boy. So I traveled a lot in 2015, primarily because I was at my contract end in Hong Kong. So I decided to take kind of a 6-month sabbatical. So I had the opportunity to travel a fair bit. And one of the other things with international schools is that usually there's a contract bonus at the end of like a 2-year contract. So not only do you get all these benefits, but at the end of your contract, you usually leave with a lump sum of money. So I left with a lump sum. And with that, I decided that I was going to go and travel. I paid my bills, I saved some, and I also traveled with some. But when I was teaching in Hong Kong, I traveled this past year, I went to Taiwan twice. I went to Vietnam for a weekend. I was flying back and forth to New York quite often because my husband actually works in New York City. And then over the summer, I traveled in Latin America. So I went to Panama and Colombia. I went to Brazil. I traveled in the Caribbean. So I went to St. Lucia and Barbados and Jamaica. And I went, to a bunch of places. But usually in terms of where I travel, the choices for me, because at the end of the day, I just love to travel. So usually where I go is dictated on cost. It's dictated on cost and is it efficient for me to go? So teaching in Asia, I was in Asia the last 2 years. Primarily, my travels were around Asia because, my school had already paid for me to get to Asia.
Right.
A lot of the places in Asia are, short flights away and not very expensive. So that's typically what I try to do wherever I am stationed, because I just love traveling everywhere and I'm just, curious about the world and what have you. I just kind of travel, within the region, and it's more cost effective for me to do so.
Wow. Okay, so you're traveling, you're making this great money, you're married. So how does that work? Is he able to come with you? Because I know a lot of our readers have families, they're thinking about starting families. I have a lot of friends that are in Abu Dhabi, and they bring their families.
Yes.
But what can you bring yours? What does it look like? Can your kid, if you bring your kids, can they go to international schools? Tell us about that.
So again, the great thing about teaching internationally, I find, is that you are really valued as an educator. These schools want you. They have a clientele, that often, wants the best for their children. They're willing to pay for this education. And therefore, they want to hire, or the schools want to hire highly qualified people, and they're willing to invest in the teachers that they hire. So typically, as part of the package, the international school will say, okay, you have a trailing spouse. We will help you get the visa for this spouse. We will fly the spouse over. We will fly your children over. These schools will often provide either free tuition for up to 2 kids, like at the actual school, or they'll provide some sort of tuition subsidy. I have worked at schools where teachers were only responsible for paying 20% of the tuition fees for their kids to attend the school that they're working at. Or alternatively, staff kids or faculty children have been able to attend the school for free. They haven't paid anything. So that has also been a benefit of being employed by the school. So in my particular case with my husband, I met him the first time around. So I taught in Hong Kong on 2 separate occasions. So I lived in Hong Kong for 4 years total. And I actually met him abroad already. And he works in international finance. So he was posted to Hong Kong, and he worked in Amsterdam and in London, and now he's working in New York. So the best thing, or the greatest thing about him, is that we both realized when we wanted to be together that we had certain career goals in mind, and we also had certain financial goals in mind. So in terms of my working situation, it was way more beneficial for me to teach or to finish out my contract in Hong Kong than to come and teach in New York City and make a New York City public school teaching salary. So in our case, we have kind of followed each other around, but we've done long distance, for a couple of years, for about 3.5 years. We did long distance, but the best thing about teaching, as whether you teach in the US or in Canada, is that you have so many weeks of vacation. So when we were long distance, because I was in Hong Kong and then he was in London, we would just see each other on all of my breaks. So every 6 to 8 weeks, I had some sort of vacation. And we would use that as an opportunity to visit each other and to meet up somewhere. So now that I'm going back to Hong Kong, I will have 2 weeks off for Chinese New Year, so at the beginning of February. And then I'll have another 10 days off for Easter. And him and I have already planned trips. So we're meeting in South Africa in February, and in April, we're meeting in Russia.
Wow.
But, you can bring your spouse with you, and you can bring your kids with you. And so that's typically not an issue at all. Like, the schools will provide air tickets for everyone, and shipping and relocation expenses, and so on and so forth.
I'm sitting here and you talked about the weeks of vacation. In the American schools, it's no longer the case. Our summer vacation has been significantly reduced because of obsession with testing.
Oh, wow.
Okay. We might have, in the district that I work in, we have 1 week we don't even have a week. We have about 4 days in October. We have Christmas break. Then we have maybe 3 to 4 days in February, spring break. And that's, it's crazy. But, I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm assuming in these international schools, testing is not a concern at all.
It depends on the curriculum that you are teaching in. So I know that there are American schools, even in Hong Kong, there's a number of American schools actually. And, the kids will do, AP, or they'll study for the SATs or what have you. I've actually invigilated exams, like the SAT exam, like when I was teaching in London. So I was teaching at a school where there were a number of like American kids and they needed to sit the SAT. And so I, invigilated that exam. But that being said, I think, I've worked in schools that have the International Baccalaureate, which, the IB programs, for those people who are aware, IB is made up of 3 different programs. So you have the PYP, which is the primary years program, the MYP, which is the middle years program, and then DP, which is the diploma program. And PYP and MYP really focus on the holistic education of the child. So testing is not that heavy. So I've never, I've been really lucky to not have to teach to the test, for example. I also teach language arts and French, so that may have something to do with it. But the schools that I've been in have not been very testing heavy, and more so focus on, the well-being of the child and the holistic development of the child. And there are a lot of opportunities for students to do community service and things like that, and travel, do field trips to different places and take part in enrichment programs and so on and so forth.
Let me ask you this. So as a teacher, there'll be a lot of people watching this who will say, okay, this is what I want to do. Yes. I'm specifically thinking about 2 of our writers who are trying to go into international schools. So give us the steps on what they need to do in order to become an international teacher.
Okay, so the first step is to sign up with one of the recruiting agencies. So there's about 3 big recruiting agencies, and these agencies essentially hold these recruiting fairs in many different locations around the world. And then schools will come to these recruiting fairs and you interview like on the spot for these positions. So one of the biggest ones is called, one of the biggest teacher recruiting firms is called Search Associates. Oh. And you can register with Search Associates. You go to their website and you register, and part of your registration involves, basically like submitting a portfolio. So you upload your resume and you fill out all of these forms, and you get like letters of recommendation, and you get your supervisors and so on and so forth to complete like these online forms as letters of recommendation and reference. Aww. And you put in your whole portfolio, I guess you could say. And then if or when you are accepted, your file becomes part of this database of all these teachers and all these schools who are looking for teachers. So you can be part of this database, and schools can kind of look you up. Likewise, on this website, like everyday positions from different schools are posted. So, for example, I get an email every day now with a list of the schools that are recruiting and the positions that they're recruiting for, and so on and so forth. And then I can also go onto the actual website and look that up myself. It's like a search engine. And then as well, Search Associates stages maybe about, I don't know, like 5 or 6 recruiting fairs a year. And the recruiting season, so essentially you would sign up for one of these recruiting firms like Search Associates in like, let's say September. Okay. So you get your portfolio and everything up there by about the end of September. In November, the information for the teaching fairs come out. And there are a few big fairs. Recruiting season typically happens from about the beginning of January to the end of February. And that would be for an August or September start. So all of this planning is kind of like a year in the making. So you sign up in September. In November, you register for a fair or multiple fairs, recruiting fairs. From January to February, the fairs take place. In an ideal world, you accept an offer at one of those fairs. And then in August, 6 months later, 7 months later, you go to your new country and your new school.
Wow.
And so these fairs, like Search Associates has a huge fair in Thailand at the beginning of January. And then they have another big one in London a few weeks after that. They have one in Toronto a few weeks after that. They have one usually in the eastern US. So it's usually like in Massachusetts, like Cambridge, or like in New York. And then the last one they usually have is on the West Coast in like San Francisco in around February. So Search Associates is like one big recruiting firm. The other major one is called ISS.
Okay.
International School Services, I believe.
Okay.
And then they have fairs as well. So I believe they have one in London, and then they have one somewhere in the eastern US, and then I think they have another one somewhere in California.
Okay.
And so that's basically it. You sign up for, or you register, you put all of your information, you make sure that you get your references from your supervisors, from parents, and so on and so forth. You put that all online, and then you attend a fair. If you are unable to attend a fair for any reason, you're always in the database, and you get job notifications. So you yourself can then contact the school independently. A lot of schools will do Skype interviews these days because it's more cost effective for them to not have to attend a fair. And yeah, so that's basically it. That's the timeline. So, and that said, never fear, like it's not too late. Schools are often recruiting, year round, because somebody has quit, or their life situation has changed and therefore they have to leave the school, or somebody has gone on maternity leave, or they're expanding, the school is expanding the program, so they need teachers. But the bulk of the hiring is done between January and March.
So let me ask you this: as you get full benefits, so you're able to go to the doctor if you get sick, your children, I'm assuming, your spouse.
Typically, I mean, it varies from school to school, but most all international schools worth their salt will have some sort of healthcare program for their instructors. Yeah.
And what happens if you go on maternity leave and you're an international teacher? Do you go back home and have the baby, or do you have the baby there?
It varies. So healthcare in Hong Kong is actually very good. So a number of my colleagues have had babies, like even in the public hospital in Hong Kong, because public health care is free in Hong Kong, or you pay very, very little. And it's quite good, especially like prenatal care. So I've had colleagues who have gone and had their children in the public hospital in Hong Kong, no problem. I've also had colleagues who have gone private, and their health insurance from the school has, paid for that. I was very ill a few years ago in Hong Kong, and so I had like a week-long stay in the hospital there. I didn't pay a cent. I didn't pay a dime. That was all covered, and it was a private hospital, but my health coverage paid for that. With regards to having, children and giving birth abroad, I have friends who teach in international schools in other places where the healthcare system is not as good, and they've opted to go home and have their child. Again, depending on which school you're at, the maternity leave or the paid leave for maternity will vary. And that has to do not only with the school's own policy, but also with regulations or like the law in that particular country. So I think in Hong Kong, maternity leave is only like 6 weeks or something like that, which actually is probably a lot more than, or in line with the US.
Yes.
Because in Canada, we actually have a full year. So I'm kind of operating from this idea that maternity leave should be a full year. But anyway.
It should be.
So in Hong Kong, there's paid maternity leave, I think, for 6 weeks, and paternity leave for like 5 days or something like that. But I've known a number of people that I've worked with who have taken 3 months off, 6 months off, and they've been able to work something out with the school. So, but it's usually not an issue. And in all the places that I've worked, in Hong Kong, in Mexico, in London, people have had, their children, even though they're not from Mexico or Hong Kong or London, they've had their children like in the place, in that city, and it's in that country, and it's not been an issue.
Wow. Let me ask you this. So as as a Canadian, living and working and traveling, have you noticed any discrimination, or is it everybody very welcoming? Like how is it to immerse yourself? And then not only you're traveling as a Canadian, but you're also traveling as a brown woman,
Right.
it's tell us the difference, as a just tell us how is that?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I actually just did a video about this. I made a YouTube video entitled "The 5 Things to Expect When Traveling While Black."
Okay.
And I have to say, honestly, Francesca, my experiences have been so positive. 99% of the time, I have had positive experiences. People are very curious, because my skin is dark, I have dreadlocks.
Right.
But as I was saying in my video, I just use it as an opportunity or as a vehicle to talk to other people and to have these encounters. And I think that it's fantastic. And I think it's hilarious. So in certain countries, particularly in Asia, I think Black people elicit, this response. People are, surprised to see you, or they're curious. They're very excited to see you. So it's been very, very positive on that end. I've had a couple of negative experiences, but nothing, extremely negative. I'm just, if anything, they've just been minor annoyances. Like I've been racially profiled, like at the airport. I've had people, going through my passport and asking me whether I have working papers and whether or not I'm a citizen of X country. But those incidents have been very few.
Wow.
Not colored my view of international travel in the least. The schools that I worked at, parents have been very welcoming of me as an educator who happens to be Black. I've gotten nothing but love.
Wow.
And
your whole story
that I've had with parents, funnily enough, have been with, like American parents. So
oh wow.
It hasn't been an issue. The response is very positive.
And so, all of this is like, I mean, I have like a million more questions, but I know you're leaving to go back to Hong Kong on the 1st. So I'm trying to like pace myself. So we have to schedule another one when you get there. Yeah, but tell us about how you are about to go back to Hong Kong, because right now you're in New York City. You've been there for a couple of months, right? Yeah. Okay. And so tell everybody what made you say, I'm going to go back, and like, how does that work in your apartment, and like, how does that work?
So anyway, basically I was working in Hong Kong these last 2 years. And my husband, who works in international finance, he was transferred from his job in London to New York City. So I joined him because I had to finish my contract in Hong Kong, and I joined him here. And I knew that I was going to take 6 months off to travel, to reconnect with family members, and so on and so forth, because I was living very far away. So it was always my plan, after traveling for 6 months, to find a job. And I was looking primarily for positions in New York City, in the international school system here, because New York is a very international place, and you get a lot of foreign people who are here working. So there are probably about a good 10 international schools in the city. There's the French International School of New York. There's the British International School of New York. There's the United Nations International School, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of diplomats' kids, coming to school here, and so on. So that was my intent. I was looking for a job for a January start here in New York City. But a couple of months ago, I was lucky to leave my teaching job in Hong Kong on very good terms. and they knew that I was moving to be with my husband here. And so a couple of months ago, they called me back and they said, oh, you know what, Oneika, we've had a change in our staffing. A teacher has left. Can you come back and cover this teacher's classes for the next 6 months? And they said to me, you know, here's what the package is. You know, we will pay your return flights. We will provide you with accommodation. The salary is going to be tax-free, basically. And here's your teaching load. Can you come back? And as I said before, you know, my husband and I, we, when we decided that we wanted to be together, you know, we had certain life goals for ourselves, and that also included certain financial goals. And when I was presented with this opportunity to go back to, you know, a city I loved, to go back to a job that I really enjoyed, and also, you know, to go back and have all these benefits, it was kind of a no-brainer. So I'm going back. I leave in 2 days. I haven't packed anything, but I'm really looking forward to going back.
Wow. So is there hold on, let's go back. What happens after 6 months? Are you coming back to New York City?
So after 6 months, I will be coming back to New York City. Okay. And so in the months that I'm in the coming months that I'm in Hong Kong, I will begin the search for a position in New York City. And as I said, you know, the schools start to recruit, you know, the international schools start to recruit about January, February. So I'm hoping to do some Skype interviews and what have you from Hong Kong. And then New York also has a lot of independent schools. So there's the public system, so the New York Board of Education. And then there's a council for independent schools. For instance, I think it's like New York Association of Independent Schools or something like that. Mm. And they usually put out their positions on their website for you know, the following school year, like in June, July, August. So those are the two kind of avenues that I will be exploring. So teaching in the international school system here in New York City, or teaching in an independent school.
Wow. You know, you just looking at you and listening to you, you sound so relaxed. You sound so refreshed. You sound so happy, that I really hope American teachers will start to look at this.
Oh my gosh, they should. The respect level is so high in international schools. You're really thought of as a professional. You're professionally developed. I mean, I've been sent on training. I was sent to Australia once to go get training. You are really developed and enriched and appreciated, at least in my experience, teaching in these types of schools.
So, you know, the last thing that I want to ask you, and I really want to follow up with you when you get there.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to do that.
Is there one country that you would not go to? Because I asked this because a couple of weeks ago I posted on our Facebook page about an opportunity in Abu Dhabi, and a lot of the teachers were like, "I would never go. No, I wouldn't go to the Middle East." But
you know what, Abu Dhabi, I would go in a second because it's very easy to like integrate there, and socially, it's off the hook. I mean, there's so many expats out there, particularly like Black and brown people. Like there's a whole big network of brothers and sisters out in Abu Dhabi and just the UAE in general. So that is a place that I would actually go to in a heartbeat. And that's why I would beseech the educators, you know, your subscribers, to really educate themselves about these destinations. I think a lot of the time we're operating on these assumptions that may be outdated. You know, you've heard it's the Middle East and they treat women like this and so on and so forth. And so you would never, ever go. And you need to talk to people on the ground to find out what things are actually like over there. So as for me, in terms of someplace I would not go, I don't think there's a place where I would just outright be like, I'm not going there. I think that all places have value. All places have something to be discovered. Usually if a teaching post is more of a hardship post, then there's a reward that comes with that, usually financial reward, because they understand that it's difficult for you to move your life to go over there. I probably wouldn't go to a place that's like experiencing war. Former colleagues of mine, actually, I was teaching with them in Hong Kong. They had gotten and accepted a job offer to go teach in the Ukraine. But this was before all of the stuff started happening there. And when stuff started getting really hectic, they ended up, and thankfully the school was very understanding, they ended up saying, you know what, like, we are reconsidering the offer. We've decided not to come. We have young children, and so on and so forth. And then they actually ended up finding a job in Vietnam at an American school there. So there's no place that I would outright not go to if it were safe. You know, I would consider it everywhere. Another former colleague of mine has gone to teach in Angola. So he's in Luanda. I've taught with, or I have friends who have taught in Nigeria. And I have a girlfriend, her and her husband are teaching in Saudi. So I think it's all about keeping an open mind. I know that Hong Kong, I mean, it's not a difficult adjustment. It's definitely not a hardship post. It's been very, very fun, and it's easy to go there. Easier than some other places. But yeah, I would outright refuse to go somewhere.
And that's what I told people about Abu Dhabi. I said, everybody that I know who's there, they love it.
Oh my God, yeah.
They're like, I've never in my life experienced anything like this. I would live there permanently.
Oh yeah.
And I just thought of another question. So when you're an international teacher and they pay for your accommodations, somewhere like Hong Kong, where it's so expensive to live at, I'm sure that your living situation is much nicer than what regular people can afford.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
So basically, I worked at 2 different schools in Hong Kong. The first school gave like a housing subsidy. And rents were so high in Hong Kong that that subsidy did not cover the rent in Hong Kong. So I had to take some money out of my pocket, which was fine because the salaries in Hong Kong are quite high anyway. And they're adjusted for the very high cost of housing. That said, housing costs are high in Hong Kong, but they don't need to be that high. It's all about location and like where you want to live. So I kind of wanted to be up in the mix. So I lived in the entertainment district, and I could walk out and go to the club and like walk home from the club. So I was willing to pay a premium for that. But if you're willing to commute, then you're laughing, because not only are you getting this like housing subsidy, but like you're not even using all of it. Wow. So yeah, it really depends. But by and large, we were living, like our standard of living was way higher than some local people, for example. But it's an adjustment. So in Hong Kong, accommodation is quite expensive and quite small. So you have to adjust your expectations for that. You probably won't have a 4-bedroom house with like a huge yard, or you can have that, but you'll be way out in the boonies. So you'll be an hour away from where stuff is happening. So you have to make that decision. It's kind of like New York in that, if you're willing to live deep in Brooklyn, or if you're willing to live in the Bronx, yeah, you're not going to pay that much for rent. But if you choose to live next to Times Square, then you're going to pay a lot, and you're going to get very little for what you pay.
Yeah.
So it's a person.
It has been great speaking with you. Like, oh my gosh, you have piqued my interest. And oh my gosh, take a second and tell our readers where they can find you on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest. I'm sure you'll get a barrage of emails. So how to find you.
So I have a blog, and it is called Oneika the Traveller. So that you can find me at www.oneikathetraveller.com. You can probably just type my name in the search engine and it'll pop up, because there are not that many of us. There aren't many Oneikas out there. You can find me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Oneika Traveller, as is my YouTube handle. It's also Oneika Traveller. Twitter, Oneika Traveller. And on Facebook, I have a Facebook page called Oneika the Traveller, or you can simply friend me. And my name on Facebook is Oneika Raymond. So yeah, I look forward to answering questions, because I think that this is something that more teachers should definitely take advantage of.
Yes, I'm so excited, guys. And so you heard what she said. Do not go based on assumptions. We have this opportunity. Go. Don't wait. I mean, I think more American teachers, you can make, I'm just so excited. So I'm going to end this. Thank you for visiting with us. We'll talk a little bit afterwards. You guys be sure not only to visit her website, go to theeducatorsroom.com, find us on Twitter, Educators Room, Facebook, The Educators Room, and stay tuned for our next episode.